A goal that I've set for myself is to use more unique materials in my builds, especially metal and glass. And being able to come up with a project that incorporates both of them is even better. Plus, it forced me to get creative and to learn the new technique of brazing aluminum. I ended up having more trouble than I expected, but I was able to make it work. Keep watching if you're curious to see how. This video is sponsored by my friends at the Home Depot. Why brazing? Or actually, you might be asking yourself, what is brazing? I'll get to that in a minute. But the reason that I decided to go with a brazing technique was because I was at my local metal supply and I found a whole bunch of aluminum pipe remnants for a very good price. Aluminum can be welded, but it requires a special machine and a little bit more expertise. One of the more DIY-friendly ways to join aluminum together is to braze it. Brazing joins two pieces of material together using a filler material, kind of like solder.
All right, so the plan is to make the table base out of a bunch of stacked up aluminum pipe, kind of like this, in a circle. But the problem is, how do I hold it together in that circle?
I needed a round form to be able to wrap my legs around to create the base of the table. I figured a quick and easy option would be to use a length of concrete form tube. It's usually used to form concrete posts and foundations, but it's lightweight and easy to cut. It's sold in 4-foot lengths, but I only needed about 12 inches. The tube is made out of a thick cardboard material, so you could use almost anything to cut it. I found it really easy to stay on the line with a multi-cutting tool. Next, it was time to start cutting the aluminum pipe to length. I know it sounds hard to believe, but aluminum is actually pretty soft and can be cut with most woodworking tools. I designed the base of the table to have 6 structural legs that will go all the way to the ground, and the rest will be staggered random lengths shorter than that. I began cutting the first 20-inch leg on my miter saw using a fine-tooth blade. When cutting aluminum with a woodworking blade, make sure you go very slowly. Next, I set up a stop block on my workbench so I could make repeated cuts and cut the other 5 long legs. I used a similar stop block technique but with wood when I built my outdoor sofa. If you haven't checked out that video, there's a link in the description box. After cutting my 6 legs and 32 other random length shorter legs, I needed to smooth over the rough and raw edges of the metal. You could use sandpaper for this step, but luckily my husband had a couple of files that he let me borrow. He even gave me a hand, so the process went a lot faster. So whenever you're joining metal, whether it's welding or brazing, good prep work is your key to success. I took my time and wiped down all 36 legs very well with acetone to remove any sort of mill scale or oily residue. Before setting up the form, I figured it was a good idea to cover the exposed cardboard on the concrete tube with some heavy-duty aluminum foil. If this is the first Pneumatic Daddick video you've seen, welcome! I'm glad you're here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can get notified every time I publish a new video. Next, I began laying out the legs in a randomish looking pattern to make sure that everything was kind of evenly spaced. I used a scrap piece of trim for a straight edge and a speed square to make sure that the pipes were sitting at 90 degrees. The idea was to try to move all the pipes around the form at once. So we applied a few strips of blue painter's tape to hold them together, temporarily. We then carefully lifted the pipes up, moved the concrete form into place, and wrapped the pipes around the outside. To hold the pipes against the concrete form, I used 2 ratcheting tie-down straps. I removed the tape, and then standing back to see how it looked, I decided I wanted to move a couple of pipes around. When everything was looking good, we tightened down the ratcheting straps. Since I was trying to make do with remnant pipe and using a standard size concrete form, I had a little bit of a gap where the pipes wouldn't meet. It was no big deal. I slid a 3/4 inch wide piece of scrap wood in between just as a space saver. In a situation like this where you can't squeeze another pipe in, it's best to leave one out and then you can draw the sides in later. I used a large speed square to make sure that the pipes were sitting as vertically as possible, and then we called it a night. The next morning, it was time to pull out the big guns. Well, a torch actually, and it's not very big, but it gets pretty hot. In my research, I found that MAP gas is one of the best to braze aluminum with. It burns quite a bit hotter than propane and is accessible at my local Home Depot. I had watched a lot of YouTube videos, so I was dumb enough to think, brazing, sure, I got this. I expected to start joining the aluminum right away with no trouble. But in fact, there was trouble. Lots of it.
I am on the struggle bus for real with this thing. I cannot get these brazing rods to stick no matter what. I don't get it. I did some samples last night. And they're holding together just fine. My rods just aren't sticking to the aluminum pipe. So I thought it was maybe not hot enough, but when I put more heat on it, I'm starting to burn through the pipe. So I really don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Turns out my first mistake was the type of rods I was trying to use. I ordered some inexpensive aluminum brazing rods off of Amazon, and they were total garbage. Even though they were more than double the price, I 100% recommend looking for the Bernzomatic aluminum brazing rods. And they're not paying me to say that, they just really are so much better. The cheap rods weren't even sticking or melting at all to the aluminum. After venting my frustrations on Instagram, a few of you guys gave me great feedback. Apparently, aluminum transfers heat so well that if you don't heat a very large section, the metal will actually cool before it has a chance to melt the rod. I was finally getting the aluminum pipe up to temperature and getting my rods to melt well, but since I was trying to braze my seams vertically, I was creating a huge mess. All my petals looked something like, let's be honest, pigeon poop. Always keep water or a fire extinguisher around when you're working with hot metal. Don't ask me how I know. Not only were my joints looking terrible, but I also discovered that the heat transferred from the pipes was starting to melt the ratchet straps. I wrapped the pipes with a little bit of twine to help hold them together. I asked my husband to lend me a hand, and we slipped a couple of pieces of cardboard between the pipes and the straps. Liking what you see? Hit that thumbs up button just down below. I listened to some of my Instagram friends' advice and decided to lay the base down on its side as well. Oh my gosh, it was like night and day. I cannot even tell you how much better my joints became. I was able to use gravity in my favor. It helped pull the melted rod into the joint instead of just dripping down. Once I got the bottom ends of all the table legs tacked together, then I could flip the base right side up. We slightly loosened the ratchet strap so we could push the cardboard on the outside down, as well as the foil-wrapped form on the inside. We tightened it back down and I started brazing the top edge of the table base. Around this time, I started getting the hang of it and I decided I really enjoyed brazing. I even let my husband give it a shot, and I think he's a big fan too. It takes some getting used to, but it's a really fun technique to try, and it's so satisfying when you get it right. Once all the legs were brazed to each other, it was time to remove the straps and to see if the base would hold together on its own. When I cut the last little bit of twine holding it together, I had these horrible visions of all the pipes falling apart. Luckily, I removed the spacer block, and to my surprise, the base actually held together really well. We very carefully pulled the pipes together to close in the gap, added the cardboard, and tightened it down again with ratchet straps. At this point, I thought it was best to keep the base together and vertical, so I brazed the last joints vertically. They weren't the most beautiful, but I got a lot of material on it and they were holding together just fine. I removed the cardboard for good, flipped it over, and now I have an end table base. All the fire and smoke had left some stains on the outside of the pipe. Luckily, acetone will take off almost anything from the surface of aluminum. I scrubbed any stains or marks with some acetone and steel wool and they came right off. The steel wool also helped to polish and add a brush texture to the outside of the aluminum. Unlike steel or iron, aluminum doesn't rust, so it can be left raw. I flipped over the base and then added press-in plastic feet on all of the 6 longest legs. You can find these press-in plastic feet in almost any shape and size. They're pretty inexpensive too. I think an 8-pack cost me less than $9. To prepare for the tabletop, I applied a few of these clear rubber bumpers on top of the base. They're the same as the kind you can add to cabinet doors to keep them from slamming. I ordered a 16-inch diameter round glass tabletop and lowered it into place. Ready to see how it looks all together? It turned out really well in the end, but I'll be honest, this project gave me a run for my money. Now that I've finally got the hang of brazing, it's actually one of my favorite techniques. It is really fun, but there is a bit of a learning curve. Don't give up if you're trying it for the first time. I have a couple of tips that I discovered on this build. If you like DIY ideas with unique materials, make sure you check out this video. And this one as well. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section. And if you haven't subscribed to Pneumatic Data yet, this would be a great time to do it. Make sure you're following along on Instagram as well. That's the channel where I'm the most active and I share a whole bunch of behind the scenes sneak peeks. Thanks for watching, guys.